One of the things about truth is sometimes you don't need any words, right? Listening to the music, to me, brings truth. And we'll talk a little bit about natural law and where truth comes from the natural world next week. But today, I thought about, and I think we've all wondered, why does truth seem to be so hard to find these days? We're literally given a rash of political, religious, and business leaders telling us things that are not true. And although Franklin D. Roosevelt famously said, repetition does not transform a lie into a truth, there's lots of folks that seem to think that it actually does. So the fact of the matter is, this is nothing new. Prophets, philosophers, poets, and military leaders have studied the value of truth and lying throughout history. However, today, we're faced by this 24/7 access to news and a wild, wild west of social media. Lies are thrown at us in ways and at speed unheard of before. Now, with a Unitarian Universalist rationalist mindset, we often know something that we hear is a lie. But doesn't it just get us so darn frustrated when other people believe that lie? Now, is everybody just so gullible? I'm not sure that's the case. But I think the old adage that says, don't let the facts get in the way of a good lie that fits your reality, is probably more the case. And so go back to one of the first dramas in the Hebrew scripture, and that was Adam and Eve. And the snake, symbolizing the tempter, asking them to eat from the tree of wisdom and knowledge. Now, what is the valuable lesson that came through that? I think the valuable lesson was that we should know the truth and that we need to see the world as it is. Now, unfortunately, a lot of religious leaders taught us something very different, and they thought we weren't worthy to handle the truth. The Catholic Church even instituted the doctrine of original sin, and for centuries would not let the laity read the Bible, lest they might find some truths that only the priests and the bishops should know about. Now, when the Protestant churches began mass distribution after the printing press was invented, they distributed the Bible in local languages throughout Europe. And it immediately began a bitter dispute because the translations were different. King James Version was based on the Latin, but it did not go back to the Aramaic, Hebrew, and Greek original texts. Now, when everybody started reading the Bible, what did they discover? Discrepancies. Now, for example, the entire Gospel of John was written in Greek. So, all of the words that are attributed to Jesus, we look at those, were never written in Aramaic or Hebrew, Jesus' tongue. So most of those words were probably not said by him. And a lot of those words have been pretty divisive over the last couple thousand years. But did this lead to a reckoning about truth? No. What happened was many of the Protestant religious leaders, primarily evangelicals and Baptists and others, decided that the Word was the inherent Word of God. There is no question about interpretation, and there should be no rational study of the Bible. And we have millions of adherents to that faith today. Now, the same could be said about our Muslim brothers and sisters, because they started out with two traditions that are still fighting with each other today. And then they allow for almost no room for disagreement, even to the fact that they would kill each other over disagreement. Now, this comes from, think about it, at one time, the most prolific centers of education and intellectual freedom in the world, in the Arab world, when Europe was entombed by the Middle Ages. So with all this history of lying to us, we seem to have survived over the millennia, see? I mean, more or less intact, right? Well, have we? And what is different today? First of all, one thing that has not changed, and it's important for us as Unitarian Universalists to know, there are three things that motivate a lie: power, control, and greed. If you follow those, you will find the lie. Now, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, you will find lies and conspiracies, right? That is what is used because the end justifies the means. Recently, one of the candidates in the primary expressed his disgust what he thought were blatant lies by the political left. But out of naivete or political astuteness, he didn't mention any lies of the political right. In fact, he actually believes many of those lies, reiterating his false beliefs about January 6th. Fox News lost a multi-million-dollar settlement because they promoted a lie about the voting machines. But not just promoted the lie, they actually found false experts to support their lie, a lie they knew was not true. And remember, all a lie has to do is cause doubt about the truth. The makers of the painkiller drugs lied about the addictive effects of their drugs. As a business, they made billions, but they caused the death of thousands of people and tore about families, not just across America, but across the world. Treating people like sheep is successful because lots of people don't want to take the time to seek out truth. While some people may be gullible, more often, I believe they're scared or attached to a way of life and they feel threatened by change. During the Civil War, thousands of young white men lost their life battling a war that benefited a small elite group of white plantation owners and affiliated shippers and businessmen. The poor white men were told one thing: you are better than black slaves. And unless you fight to preserve your status, the black slaves will be equal to you. What a lie, but wrapped around a veneer of truth. It's a lie that persists today. It's being used throughout our country, where white, primarily non-educated males continue to believe that the last presidential election was stolen, that protecting minorities is meant to hurt them, and that immigrants are putting them out of work. We are living in dangerous times, and let me not underestimate the precarious situation we're in. I was in Washington, D.C. last year. I saw the barriers that were still around the Capitol building and how close the insurrection did get to actually capturing elected officials. Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote, "In our country, the lie has become not just a moral category, but a pillar of the state." Now, he was speaking about the Soviet Union, but he could well have applied that to our nation. Philosopher and political scientist John Stuart Mill wrote, "The idea that truth always triumphs over persecution is one of those pleasant falsehoods which most experience refutes. History is teeming with instances of truth put down by persecution. If not put down forever, it may be set back centuries." So, one of the ways that fascists and dictators flourish is by using actual democratic tools to eliminate democracy. They will effectively accuse their opponents of being fascist. People who think they will be the losers if democracy prevails will believe these lies. And the persecution of the press during the last administration is a hallmark of repressive governments. It's a very effective way to promote lies and give doubt to truth. And let's face it, the media has not always been truthful. So there is that element that can be picked on. And it was. So power, control, and greed will be at the heart of the lies. What we do as Unitarian Universalists is we make a commitment to our own free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And that's important to us. But it can't stop there, because we actually then have to fight against those powers that work around us to promulgate lies and disregard truths. The water is safe to drink in Flint, Michigan. Raise your hands. How many believe that? Okay. Immigrants are poisoning our country's blood. January 6th was an Antifa and FBI plot. Now, if any of you have ever studied J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI, you know that there's a modicum of truth in what governments can do to maintain control, power, right? And so these are exploited to get people to believe these lies. Let's go to our own state of Florida. We cannot say gay among school children or talk about their gay, lesbian, or transgender parents or teachers. Transgender youth are being barred by a law that's in court to have the right to gender-affirming medical care. Books that have themes that actually invite students to think are banned. Women are not allowed to make their own reproductive medical health decisions about their bodies. We cannot tell students in schools that Rosa Parks was relegated to the back of the bus because she was black. We don't tell students that slavery involved capture, separation of children from their parents, unbearable torture, and death, only that some black slaves toward the end of slavery happened to learn skills that helped them later in life. In the most recent declaration by our state health director is that COVID vaccinations are bad and they should not be given in the state of Florida. So our state is at a crossroad, and I fear it's going to get worse. These are lies that we cannot accept. In the past, speaking truth to power often led to persecution and death. That's the result of most prophets' lives. After all, the last person burned at the stake during the Inquisition was a Unitarian minister that was killed by the Calvinists. Today, let's say you speak about the elimination of books in our schools, and you go to a school board meeting. Now, after the school board meeting, you then are subjected to a vitriol of anonymous hate and threats through the mail, calls, and social media, and even protesters screaming in front of your house. This intimidation might cause you to think twice about going to that school meeting. Because although you probably won't be killed, you may be threatened. In today's world, you never know who has a gun that's standing in front of your house. What is our answer? What can we do? So first we need to remember, as the hymn tells us this morning, that Unitarian Universalists have been heretics since the beginning. That's how we started. We question the truths that were presented by the authorities, and we realize that we don't have the whole answer, and no one does. And when we questioned those truths, we found them to be wanton, sometimes to be inaccurate or untruthful, and sometimes just simply to be outdated. This is our heritage, and this is our opportunity. So recently, a Unitarian Universalist minister related a conversation to me with a congregant. She told him, quote, "Unitarian Universalism has given me the freedom to believe what I want, but I don't know what to believe. You have set me free, but you haven't given me the tools." So, in humility, I'm going to give us some tools. First, although we are a small congregation in numbers, remember, we can be a mighty voice collectively, and this voice can be multiplied by joining with our allies. And as the reading tells us, our allies have their own issues. If no one's supporting them, who is going to be left to support us? And don't think there's not a strong movement in our country to have a much more orthodox religious belief system, right, in place. Here are some important examples coming up where I would like us to consider where the Unitarian Universalist Church of Jacksonville shows up. First of all, iCare. iCare is made of many members of different faith backgrounds. Some are much more orthodox than we might believe, but there's a commonality in community justice that we all share. And it's that commonality that we get to work with the powers of our political leaders. Now, I can tell you firsthand that the way that political leaders deal with iCare right now is to ignore iCare. Try not to go to a meeting, avoid a meeting, just not deal with them. But I can tell you that through the efforts of many, iCare will not be ignored. The Martin Luther King Parade. The parade is a source of much pride in our community. It's a city where even today many white businesses continue to refuse to honor the holiday. And while the parade does have a dose of commercialism, those of you who are gone, think of the people in the Statue of Liberty costumes, you know, hawking insurance. It represents all life in honoring Martin Luther King. Our church can take pride in having one of the only white ministers in Jacksonville march with the black ministers during the Civil Rights Movement. And we should be proud of continuing to be one of the congregations marching in the parade. I mentioned the Martin Luther King breakfast. Having our name present among the sponsors, which represent a who's who of Jacksonville, is important to let the world know we are here. The Pride Parade, both here and in Nassau County, one of the most persecuted populations in Florida, is in dire need of our support. For us personally, as we make that journey, I'm going to speak more about how to use different methods of truth, the scientific method, natural law, and our own experience. And then further on in the year, we're going to talk about the truths that our prophets and mystics have brought to us. But just as an introduction to next week, the scientific method employs a thoughtful combination of direct experience and reason to parse out fact from fiction, truths from untruths, and what is likely from what is unlikely. I think we know what's likely from what is unlikely, but I think we're in a world where it's been made harder to do that. And I think as Unitarian Universalists, we can focus on certain areas that we know speak justice to power. iCare, the parade for Martin Luther King, the breakfast, the pride parades, those are some areas, not the only areas, but those are some areas that can help us to join with allies to speak out for truth and justice. One of our most noted Unitarians, Thomas Jefferson, wrote in a letter to his nephew that the same process should be applied to religion. Jefferson says, "Divest yourself of all bias. Shake off all the fears and servile prejudices under which weak minds are servilely crouched. Fixed reason firmly in her seat, and call to her tribunal every fact, every opinion. Question with boldness even the existence of a God, because if there be one, he must more approve of the homage of reason than of blindfolded fear." As I conclude today, I want to let you know that the earth is not flat, no matter what the state of Florida tells you. Thank you.